For people living with learning disabilities, even the smallest task can often seem insurmountable. Just imagine trying to go into a grocery store and picking up the things you need to create a recipe, for instance. If you have adult dyslexia, then even making that list can seem impossible. Far too often, children with dyslexia are simply passed through school until they graduate, or at least that was what happened in the past. Teachers would often find the children difficult and would simply put them in a remedial class. Those children grew up and still had the same learning disability. Dyslexia is a very common learning disability, and one that is not solely reserved just for children. Adults all across the world suffer from this condition, and many don't get the help that they need. This audio program will cover many of the questions that adult dyslexia diagnosis brings up. If you know of someone that is suffering from this disability, maybe you can help them get the help they need. What is adult dyslexia? Dyslexia, whether it's adult or child, is considered a learning disability. It's usually specific in that it mainly affects how things are perceived by the individual affected by the disability. Most dyslexics find that words often appear to be scrambled and not in the correct order. This also pertains to numbers as well. Dyslexia actually is a Greek word that means difficulty with words, but as research has shown, it can affect numbers just as well. Many dyslexics find that they have trouble following orders or instructions and have great difficulty putting letters and numbers in the correct order. Often they will be thinking in their mind that they are putting it down correctly, but in actuality some are reversed. With adult dyslexia, it can be even more difficult because chances are they have been dyslexic their entire lives. So, they didn't develop the necessary coping skills early on because the disability was not diagnosed early in their childhood. At this point, they may be suffering from poor work habits and even very low self-esteem. How is adult dyslexia diagnosed? Unfortunately, many adults that are living with dyslexia are not properly diagnosed as a child. In children, there are several developmental signs that point to whether or not he or she has dyslexia. Diagnosing it in adults can be difficult because they may have some functioning reading, writing, and mathematics abilities, but learning comes as a great challenge. But there are some tests that can be performed to determine whether an adult does have dyslexia or if it is another problem causing them poor performance. Diagnosing of dyslexia is quite a complex series of tests, and they range from an IQ test to a short-term memory test. It can also include a reading test where the subject is tested to determine the level at which he or she can read and understand the written material. Most of these tests are performed by professionals such as neurologists, educational psychologists, neuropsychologists, and even medical doctors. Are there any underlying causes to adult dyslexia? There are sometimes underlying causes to adult dyslexia, but it's hard to determine sometimes whether the cause is truly underlying or if it's simply overlapping or contributory. Auditory processing disorder is one such case where people hear things in reverse, which in turn can lead to them writing it down or processing it wrong. Another condition might be attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD, where it's pretty hard for the person to concentrate on one thing long enough for the information to be processed. There are even conditions such as scotopic sensitivity syndrome or Irlen syndrome, where a person is sensitive to certain light wavelengths. This sensitivity makes visually processing difficult for the person. What are some related conditions to adult dyslexia? Well, not every adult that is diagnosed with dyslexia will have the same conditions, but some of the conditions that often do occur with dyslexia are dysgraphia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, and specific language impairment or cluttering. Each of these conditions involves some sort of an ability that the adult dyslexic is having problems with. Dyspraxia is a condition in which there is an actual neurological condition that makes balance difficult when dealing with routine tasks. The others listed are different problems that may involve a person seeing a process or a word combination clearly in their mind, but not having the ability to record or write it down properly. Dysgraphia generally occurs with writing and typing, whereas dyscalculia is a problem that involves mathematics. In all of the related conditions, the end effect is still the same. The person is not able to express through writing or speech the correct order of the words or numbers. What are the symptoms of adult dyslexia? Diagnosing adult dyslexia is often far harder than it is to diagnose dyslexia in children. With children, especially while they are learning, there are often key signs that will be noticed, and then testing can be done. But with adults, it's a little bit harder because they have often learned compensating techniques to overcome some of the difficulties. But some general symptoms may be a difficulty in comprehending what is being read, or even taking an extraordinary long time to read a simple paragraph. If the person is continuously switching numbers or letters when writing or typing, then that's another sign. The adult dyslexic may also have hand-to-eye coordination problems, making it pretty difficult to do repetitive tasks. What are some theories of dyslexia? There are many theories regarding adult dyslexia. Some of these are evolutionary hypothesis, phonological deficit theory, visual theory, cerebellar theory, and rapid auditory processing theory. Evolutionary hypothesis is actually quite interesting. The theory suggests that the reason some people are dyslexic is because reading is an unnatural act, because it is only in the last 100 years that reading has become so important. The idea is that it does not come naturally to people, and individuals are forced to learn to read even though the body truly does not have a physical use for it. The phonological deficit theory is one that relies upon the fact that there, may be impairment when it comes to listening. The storage area of the brain does not process sounds quite the same way that others perceive and retrieve it. In contrast is the visual theory, which means that a visual distortion or impairment makes it pretty hard for the individual to process letters or words when it's written. The cerebellar theory is an actual biological theory that the cerebellum is dysfunctional. The rapid auditory processing theory is similar to the phonological deficit theory, except that this theory deals with short sounds that may occur rapidly. Who are some early pioneers in discovering and researching adult dyslexia and dyslexia in general? Well, there have been many great early researchers, doctors, scientists. They've all studied dyslexia. Oswald Burkhan identified the condition all the way back in 1881. But the disorder was not officially labeled as dyslexia until Rudolf Berlin did so in 1887. For many years, dyslexia was labeled as congenital, word, blindness, because there was such a fixation on individuals who were unable to comprehend written material. It was thought that the brain simply processed the information wrong, and so when writing or reciting the information back, many words were omitted or simply switched around. In some instances of adult dyslexia, that is the case. Since those early pioneers, many other researchers have studied this disorder and actually discovered that it is more than just phonetics or alphabets that can have dyslexics stumped. Some, such as Galaberta and Kemper in 1979, discovered that the brains of dyslexics actually have anatomical differences. This helped show the world that it was not simply poor learning skills. It showed that there are actual physical differences that lead a person to being dyslexic. Is adult dyslexia a genetic condition? Well, it does have some genetic markers that can be identified, but in 2007, a review was published that stated that there were no processes that were influenced by these genes. Unfortunately, there is simply not enough data to accurately say whether or not dyslexia in adults or children is actually a genetic condition that can be inherited. It may turn out to be that there is just something that goes wrong during conception when the genetic material is formed that makes dyslexia possible. How is adult dyslexia managed? It can be managed in numerous ways, but first, the underlying conditions have got to be diagnosed and addressed. Researchers have found success with dyslexics by using phonological educational methods. But if there is a phonological problem, then another method has got to be used. It often helps to use a combination of visual, auditory, and written training to help the dyslexic. For those living with dyslexia, there are ways to cope with everyday tasks. One way is to invest in speech-to-typing software. The person speaks into the microphone while the software is running, and the program writes down what is being said. If an adult dyslexic is taking classes, it may be useful to use a recording device in class and then later carefully use the device to review and write out the notes. Is there a cure for this? Unfortunately, there is no cure for adult dyslexia or dyslexia period. All a person can do is to understand how to manage their dyslexia and learn coping mechanisms to help them learn and function in society. There are numerous support groups that can help. Once the condition has been diagnosed and any underlying conditions addressed, then treatment can begin.
Find out if you have adult dyslexia at www.adult-dyslexia-test.com. I repeat, www.adult-dyslexia-test.com.